All right. Well, everyone, welcome. We're really excited to have you all here this morning for a very exciting panel on go-to-market strategy hosted by iHUB, powered by NUMA. So I am Frances. I'm the CEO and Managing Director for NUMA New York. A little bit about NUMA. We launched in Paris, France about 2 decades ago. We have one of the oldest accelerators in Europe. We've accelerated to date over 600 international startups and have operated in 8 global markets. And in New York City, our main activities are startup acceleration, specifically for international companies that are looking to enter US. And we also work with a multitude of corporates on different education programs. So a little bit about us by the numbers. So we've trained to date over 10,000 managers. We've accelerated globally over 600 startups, and we have over 500 global mentors and coaches that work with our startups. And these are some of our corporate clients as well. So we work with a multitude of different industries that also are our clients, but then also work with our startups. And these are some of our 65 plus alumni in New York. We actually just kicked off another accelerator program this week. So we have worked with companies from over 20 different nationalities, including Ukraine. Now I'm going to introduce Dimitri from iHUB to talk a little bit about their activities.
Frances, thanks so much for the introduction. Hi everybody, it's a great pleasure to be here online, and I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about iHUB. iHUB is one of the earliest players in the tech scene in Ukraine. We've been working for over 8 years now, and as part of our activities, we have several business focuses. One, of course, is co-working. We have 4 locations across Ukraine and Moldova. The other is very important and new to us is tech acceleration, and we are very proud to be working together with NUMA on this new amazing initiative. We do a lot of events and event production, education, and community management is and has always been and will always be at the core of iHUB and our mission. We also work with Estonia and e-residency. So for those of you who have ambitions to go beyond Ukraine, to go across Europe and across the European zone, we will be able to help you with your needs when it comes down to registering a company, taking care of your bank accounts and financial systems that you need to use as part of our cooperation with Estonian e-residency. As well as we do spend a lot of time and we do build our own in-house startups. So we know firsthand how hard it is to build startups, and we have some impressive numbers when it comes down to the number of people in our community, to the amount of money our residents and our alumni have raised, as well as to just sheer size of real estate that we manage, which is over 3,000 square meters to date. We do have amazing partners, and NUMA is among them, but just to name a few, it's Techstars, 500 Startups. We have worked with a number of governments on various projects, all focusing on supporting Ukraine, young entrepreneurs in Ukraine, as well as tech and innovation. And we've been very blessed to cooperate with some of the biggest brands and unicorns, such as Grammarly and Volt, just to name a few. And on this note, I'd like to hand it over to Alisa, who is the head of the Acceleration Support Program with the Ukrainian Startup Fund. Alisa, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to join this event and to see all of you today. Thank you. I'm Alisa Bankovska. I'm head of Acceleration Program in Ukrainian Startup Fund. And first of all, I'd like to say who we are. Ukrainian Startup Fund is a state-owned fund that grants the most talented Ukrainian entrepreneurs. So we support startups by providing grants on no equity basis. $25,000 for startups on the pre-seed stage, and would grant of $100,000 for the seed stage. Also, we finance startups to participate in the training programs of national and international accelerators. And we offer a lot of other financial and non-financial opportunities for startups. Our mission is to promote creation and growth of technology startups in Ukraine at an early stage of development in order to increase their global competitiveness. Last year, we launched our acceleration program, and I'm sure that that's really great news for Ukrainian startups. The purpose of the program is to help Ukrainian startups become successful global companies by providing training, mentoring, exchanging of experience, and quality networking with the strongest players of the international startup ecosystem. So what do we offer startups? A startup has an opportunity to receive a grant of up to $10,000 from the Ukrainian Startup Fund and save years of trials and errors and accelerate its development through the best Ukrainian and foreign acceleration programs. Only startups that have applied for a pre-seed or seed grant under the main program of the fund and have indicated their desire to accelerate in the application can participate in the grant acceleration program of the fund. Important thing is that startups can apply for both a grant under the main program of the fund and a grant for acceleration. So please take advantage of a great opportunity. From last summer, we have been accepting applications from accelerators from all over the world, and we have already accredited 6 accelerators whose programs can be passed by startups with the support of the fund. Seed Forum Global, 1991 Open Data Incubator, Blue Lake Accelerator, ISE Group, US MAC, and iHUB powered by NUMA. It is important that applications from both startups and accelerators for accreditation are accepted on a regular basis. But today, you all have a really great opportunity to get acquainted with the iHUB powered by NUMA accelerator and learn a lot of useful information. And I would like to say that it's great to have you on board. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Great. So to dive a little bit in before we get into the conversation about the acceleration program with iHUB powered by NUMA. So our programs consist of a couple of key components. We have one-to-ones weekly with mentors that can address your specific challenges. We have a weekly stand-up where all of the companies together learn and share challenges and learn from each other. We have weekly lunches and wine o'clocks where we get to share time with mentors. In terms of the program, weeks 1 through 4, there are components of workshops on topics such as project management, fundraising, startup versus scale-ups, design thinking, and we have some key events with our cohort kickoff where you're first introduced to the network of mentors and experts that will be working with you, as well as an internal demo day. Weeks 5 through 8, we have workshops on topics like startup valuation, your sales assets so you can close deals, networking, pricing strategy, MVP, and market research. And then we have an event specifically for you to be pitching and preparing you for VCs. And then finally, in weeks 9 through 12, our workshop content focuses on things like negotiation tactics, how to build your team and hire, sales stack automation, how to close funding, and how to have high value conversations. And then finally, we finish the program with a demo day. as a small excerpt of some of our many mentors and of who you're going to meet also today on our panel. This is the leadership team involved. So I'm the CEO and Managing Director. Giulia Imperatrice is our Program Director. Shai is our Program Manager. And from iHUB, we have Dimitri and Vadim. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Robert Napoli. He is a trainer, speaker, business coach, and startup mentor that's based in Brooklyn. He specializes in creating engaging programs, workshops, and curriculum for startups focused on topics like sales, marketing and branding, talent development, and continuous learning. In 2020, he delivered over 50 workshops to 220 plus entrepreneurs across 27 countries and has helped scale international startups in multiple markets. We also have with us today Christina Finseth. She leads growth marketing at Interstellar, a SaaS prospecting outreach platform for recruiters and sellers. She's been a key member of the go-to-market teams at 3 different SaaS startups and spends time outside of work mentoring and advising other startups on go-to-market strategy. Christina's strengths are in strategy for entering new markets or segments, building marketing funnels that convert sales plus marketing alignment, and outbound sales strategy. And then finally, we have us with as well, Murali. He is a product executive with 20 plus years of experience building and leading high performance, high integrity product management and market teams at both global corporations, Cisco, Oracle, and startups that deliver transformative solutions in the areas of technology, infrastructure, security, cloud, and telecommunications. So welcome as well, Murali. Great, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and we'll dive into the conversation. Awesome, welcome everyone. So to kick it off, I'd love to start with the question of why do you need a go-to-market strategy and why is that something that's important? And I will kick that off first to Rob.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts. You know, when we think about go-to-market strategy and why we need it, it's really important to understand your goals for the market. When you enter a new market, there's a reason for that. Whether it's the size of the market, why, and what are your intentions? What are your goals to driving that forward? So really it comes down to the what, and really making sure that you do the research, which is what we'll get into a little bit, is why you need it, because you need to research to make sure that you have ICP, you have all these things. So that's where I'll start out and stop before I get into some other stuff and pass it along.
Awesome. And then Christina, do you want to add anything to like why you need to be, founders should be thinking about this go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to put it kind of simply, how else can you really measure success or figure out baselines or understand and validate, you know, product and positioning and ICP, like Rob said. You know, I think you can't figure out what needs to be fixed unless you have a strategy, at least initially in some form, right? And run with it. So it's all about testing, iterating, refining, measuring until you've got your A strategy. So I think the bad news is, and we'll get into it, it doesn't just stop there though.
Great. Murali, anything you want to add?
Yes, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody for this opportunity. And I'm so excited to, you know, see such a big group and such an exciting environment in Ukraine and the collaboration here with iHUB and NUMA. So thank you so much. And for my co-panelists as well. You know, one thing in addition to what Rob and Christina said just now, I'd like to highlight that, you know, from a product person, I come from an engineering background. And, you know, when I look at any problem to solve, I end up looking at the technology, or at least I used to, before I ended up starting my own. And I learned very quickly, it's not just about putting the product out there onto the market, whether it's for consumers or whether it's for B2B, it's not just about throwing it over the wall. It's about making sure that you can first identify your product market fit. And to do that, you need to just think about what problem is your product solving. It has to be easy to understand and communicate to your audience. Is it easy to get started, especially SaaS startups? How difficult is it to get started using your product? And then ultimately, are you seeing people come back? The only way you can go through all of these to ultimately see the success of your product is, especially at the early stage, is through metrics, as Christina said. And so I totally agree that first you have a product and an idea, solution, whatever, but you need to build that through metrics that are defined, and then you can get into the growth, of course.
Wonderful, great. And so you all touched on a little bit of these 4 blocks of the go-to-market strategy, which are market research, segmentation, product fit, testing, and customer discovery. I'd love for each of you to touch a little bit on, some of those core blocks and your experiences with them. So, Christina, I'll pass it off to you first, specifically to talk about, marketing as it relates to go-to-market.
Yeah. So, I think all blocks are probably equally important, right? So I'm sure everyone's going to share some great things, but, for me personally, I've been a part of go-to-market teams at several early stage startups. And obviously, and, this is my opinion, the sooner a company can adopt marketing and drive their own outbound, the better. The problem is a lot of companies really focus on this build it and they will come approach to marketing. And that's great. Listen, I'm a marketer at heart, so I fully believe in building these inbound funnels, right? Especially if they're quality people coming in the door. But there's something to be said about controlling your own destiny and just putting an outbound playbook into motion. And to me, that's really an easy way to start having conversations, picking up on trends in the markets that you're trying to penetrate, figuring out if a market or segment is fruitful, worth doubling down on. Test pricing, test your pitching, everything. Plus, you're literally hand selecting the folks you want to reach out to, not just casting a wide net and kind of hoping it sticks. Kind of to Morales' point of throwing something over the wall, right? So there's just a thoughtfulness to outbound that really matters. So I think the sooner you can kind of start thinking in both of those terms, the better.
No, I love that. It's I'm hearing a lot about really intentionality behind that. And Rob, maybe you can touch a bit on sales and on customer discovery.
Yeah, and this kind of plays right into what Christina was saying. The first thing you need to do with a go-to-market is research, right? So the intentionality of why you're going to that market. The second is defining your segment, right? So who is your buyer? Who is your ICP, ideal customer persona? Who do you want to sell to and why? And then getting into talking to your customers. It's really easy for us to assume that we know the pain that we're solving and that the pain that we're solving, our customer has it. And so we really need to talk to our customers, do that discovery process, spend time early getting to know what they want so that you can tailor your sales pitch, your marketing collateral. If you have to, pivot your product when it comes into that. So the first key piece, I think, when it comes to this is testing everything, testing fit, testing marketing, testing sales. And you do that through talking to your customer. We make it about us all the time and forget to make it about our customer.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And Morale, you touched a little bit on this before, but if you could go a little bit deeper into specifically product market fit and how, its importance and how people go about finding that.
Right. I mean, I think there's no two ways about this. I think the clear thing that both Christina and Rob articulated is very important. When you are especially in the early stages of your company, I mean, I don't know the breakdown of how the people in attendance are in different stages, but I know that they're all in early stages. It's incredibly important to have I think you used the word, Francis, which is intentional. You need to have an intentional plan as to how to take, whom to talk to. It starts obviously with word of mouth and connections and so on, but immediately it has to transition by using those metrics. And those metrics will help you determine whether your product is easy to understand, if it really is a pain point for customers, if there is a retention value in your product line. You will immediately see that come through. And finally, of course, you get into the growth stage. When you get into the growth stage, things then you kind of start to look at a different kind of a go-to-market strategy. So fundamentally, I'd say make sure that from a product market fit, as you look at the market segment, as well as the customer base that you're going after, you pick a few intentional customers who are the closest or the most ideal customer base for you to get started. That way you have a plan that you can execute to, because ultimately it's all about execution as well. It's good to build all of these, but then you have to execute.
Absolutely. And just a quick note to the audience, if you have Q&A, put that in the Q&A and we'll get to any questions that you have as well for the panelists at the end. And now to get to sort of like the execution aspect of it, there's a lot of different blocks of go-to-market. How do you decide which to prioritize or work on first? Is there a hierarchy? I'll give that to Rob first.
Yeah, I think we're going to assume that product is figured out for this piece, right? So if you're going to a new market, you have a pretty good understanding that your product is ready for that new market. So the first piece, how I'd prioritize, is research, knowing the market. And this research is twofold. One is understanding the market you're going into and all the facts, but two is looking in the mirror. Usually when we say we're going to a new market, we think that we have a new solution that no one else in the market's doing. And so we lose out and we put our blinders on that we don't see competition. And we think we're the only ones. And so we go into the market not with eyes wide open. So do your research, both internally, looking in the mirror and saying, these are our real competitors in the market, and externally, what are the market factors at play? What are our competitors doing well? And what are they not doing well? Where do we come in and fit the bill? One of my favorite books when I talk about go-to-market and looking at competition is by Austin Hanson. It's called Steal Like an Artist. The whole concept of his book is don't reinvent the wheel. Leverage what is happening in the market. Leverage what your competitors are doing well. Take that and ingrain that and look at what they're not doing well and learn from that and show up in those spaces. So I prioritize everything first with market research and your segmentation. That's where that product market fit comes in. And then you got to go execute with sales.
I think it's a really important point, Rob, about competition. I see a lot of startups think that they actually have no competition, but if you're solving a problem, there are always other ways that, even if it's not a direct competitor, that your customers are solving their problem today. So I think that's really important to note. And Christina, would you like to weigh in on sort of the prioritization and how you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to piggyback on that last note you just made too, and kind of off of Rob, whether or not you think you have a direct head-to-head competitor, I guarantee you there's probably some sort of overlap with competing products. And to your point, that people are using to kind of band-aid parts of their problems together. So you need to take those into account as well. But as far as like prioritizing these blocks, echoing Rob, I agree. I think what really matters, and I think Murali will probably appreciate this coming from the technical side, is I actually think of like the marketing side and the go-to-market strategy piece in terms of sprints, not marathons. And so I like to kind of run more of an agile process. So for example, right now in my current role, I own marketing and the sales development teams. I come up with 1 to 2 key initiatives per quarter at most that we would like to achieve. And this doesn't take into account kind of the ongoing pieces. To focus in, test things quickly in the beginning. I think the biggest piece is you've got to be quick to production. Murali was talking about execution. Clean up after you determine if it sticks or not. And I think the biggest thing is like action, right? Because regardless, you could do something out there and learn from the mistakes that you make, right? And I think that's part of where people get afraid. I've got to have this perfect before I push it out. No, you need as good of a kind of a playbook as you can get at that stage, but be quick to act on it and iterate from there. Don't be afraid to do that. So I think that's just something I would throw out there. And if we're talking about book recommendations too, and you're really into kind of that marketing side, maybe even doing some new category creation, Play Bigger is one of my favorite books. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. And Murali, you touched a little bit before on, having an early stage versus how that changes when you get to a little bit more of a growth stage. Can you talk about the changes in go-to-market strategy over time and in the life of a startup?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that, and I'll try to address this from both, a SaaS B2C as well as B2B perspective. I want to just give if it's okay, just give a quick short anecdote from my experience. When I was at the startup, this is especially relevant in infrastructure industry, just primarily B2B. When I was in this startup called NCME Networks, we were new to this space in networking virtualization. It was a new concept, a new wave. There were no traditional competitors or competitor products that we could go head on, but it was more of selling the whole solution. So it became a challenge of how do we get out to the customers and how do we scale our product line for the goals we had set ourselves. So the first thing we did was, like I said earlier, was we tried to nail down the specific market segments and the customers, like both Rob and Christina said. Then when we got access to it, and the strategy there in that particular example was to find a channel. So in channels are available in all kinds of spaces, whether it's as a part of a partnership, whether that's with a bigger vendor or a bigger player, piggybacking on, say, a cloud provider, using all kinds of those partnership angles, or it could be a channel that that sells your product in their name, whichever approach, right? So finding that channel first, and as you grow, as you go from a early go-to-market strategy to a greater one, you start looking at different kinds of metrics. You start thinking about growth-centric metrics. What is our conversion rate optimization number? What is the retention of our customer base? How am I, the particular market segment that Rob mentioned that we're going after, how good am I attacking that, and how am I growing that? Should I look at adjacent markets as I look at growth? So find 3 to 5 growth metrics that translates ultimately back to retention. It translates back to scale, and of course also product improvements. I loved what Christina just said. Done is better than perfect. It's extremely important. It's a hard lesson I've learned. You've got to get it out there to get feedback. People will give you feedback, and ultimately you will be able to tune it. And there's some really nice examples about even Airbnb and how their initial website looked and what they were trying to sell and how they transitioned over time with the same point, go-to-market strategy changing over time. So
wonderful. Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Murali hit the nail on the head, and the big piece about how it changes over time, and Christina beautifully put it, get good out and pivot and grow, right? What tends to happen, especially when you go to a new market, especially from what I've seen in the further east you go, that perfection, and it needs to be perfection before it can go out. And that actually hinders you, because even if you have it perfect, you might be too late and the market has already changed. So when you put it out and you pivot and you let it you take this feedback loop and you run these circles and these sprints, as Christina was saying, this is how you grow over time. And your customers in the market wants to see that. So when you start thinking about, if you're looking at getting funding later on in that market, you're looking at key level partnerships, they're going to look at, what did you come into the market with, and how have you evolved? Because one of the biggest things that we saw because of the pandemic is resiliency. Are you resilient, and are you able to pivot and change with market conditions? And so if you're always going for perfect, you're never going to learn those lessons early. Start learning them in the go-to-market, so when things happen 2, 5, 10 years down the road, your company is set up for that change, that pivot, and that resiliency.
That's an interesting point. It's almost like we're in a new market in the new sort of climate of the pandemic.
Absolutely are.
Christina, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, just the biggest thing here is, you know, kind of thinking of real world example, the way that we at my company positioned our product and, you know, really did any kind of outreach or communication with prospective buyers changed like overnight when the pandemic hit. And so it's great to have kind of your go-to strategy, but you can't fool yourself into thinking that you might not have to quickly pivot. And having a team, that a go-to-market team, whether that's 2 people, 1 person, 3 people, however many you have, to be able to say, all right, this just happened. What are we going to pivot to? Here is our action items. Let's do it, you know? And so I think it's just about evolving, and doing retros on a quarterly basis has been really huge for me too. Just looking back at the data, looking back at the metrics, right? Seeing what really worked, what should we shift going into the next quarter.
Wonderful. And two, in terms of like data and going off of that, you know, how can you get deep quality feedback from the market when your quantity of data might not be so rich, especially if you're, you know, an earlier company? I'll pass that off to Murali first.
That's a extremely, you know, that is definitely the most difficult part of the initial stage, which is when you don't have that rich quality data back, how do you actually go? You know, I'm reminded, as I was saying earlier, about the story of Airbnb. You know, when they first started out, they were thinking about giving, I think many people probably know, there's this lot of stuff on YouTube as well about that story, but it was interesting that they started out by talking about a couch, renting a couch or a particular part of a apartment. And when they actually went to the users, the initial users, they were not getting the increasing number of users. So they went to the users, to their homes. One founder was taking pictures of the home to showcase on the web. The other was talking to the host and trying to find out what was difficult about using their website. What was the issues around easy to understand or not? How does that user, the host, recommend improving the experience? So that kind of initial, this is like really at the initial stages, that touch points with the user base is extremely important. I can tell you from my experience in my startup that I co-founded 3 years ago, that really helps. Getting that close first touch point. So the metrics remain the same. It's ultimately about customer experience, the user experience, but now you're doing straight touch points. And then of course, making sure you refine the product market fit based on that feedback. Then you go into things like, you know, signups, onboarding, purchase conversions, and then measuring that over time. So it'll come. It's like one brick at a time, one milestone at a time as you grow, but it has to be done with an intentional manner, like you said, Francis, at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Murali kind of covered it very well. The key pieces here of you're not going to get a ton of quantity, right, early on. I mean, unless you blow up in a new market, which is amazing, and you have more data than you know can do with. But when you have that limited data, what do you go back to? And that's talking to your customers, right? At the end of the day, everything that you do, everything that your product or service is about them and not you. So when you don't have a lot of data to look at and trends over time, it is crucial to talk to those customers, take that feedback, and develop those small mini milestones, right? It's all going to be towards acquisition, growth, and retention. We know that. and you test that through the marketing and content and stuff that you're doing. And those things that you're testing is based off what customers are saying. And that's how you actually create a number of data, right? You can go create data points by saying, the customer said this, let's test this in our marketing, or let's test this in our product, or let's test this in our sales. And you can go create that data. So that just kind of tying that piece together from step 1 to step 2 and making sure you don't lose sight of customers.
Great. And in terms of like metrics, what are some of the key metrics that companies should be looking out to figure out if their go-to-market strategy is on the right track? And I'll pass that to Christina first.
Yeah, I mean, so metrics, there's so many you can look at. So here's the problem. Data can be a rabbit hole. I sometimes will spend all day looking at data and I'm like, oh no, I got to snap out of this and actually do some things too, right? So data can be really tricky. I think for me, thinking about like just at the core, how is the market responding? And so again, kind of thinking to Murali and Rob's point, and then I'll kind of pass the baton here because I know Murali's got metrics like no other, but you know, just understanding your customer base. So like, I think 2 things that have been really helpful for me at least is, you know, having a customer advisory panel as early as you can, which kind of factors into having those really like close touch points, and also building a community. If you have the ability to do that, that's agnostic of your product or service, that allows you to get kind of those key insights and trends from your market, whether or not they're customers or ever going to be customers. If they're practitioners or people or thought leaders or the people that would potentially be using your product or service, it's huge to evaluate like what's important to them, how they're saying things in their own language, which will feed into your marketing and stuff like that. So yeah, I think I'll pass the baton on this one.
Awesome. I'll pass it to Murali then.
Yeah, so I think again, right, it's important not to get overwhelmed by the various kinds of data. I think Christina's very, very right on that. Keep it simple, okay? First and foremost, think about if it's a SaaS website-centric company, how are the visits to my website looking? What is the sign-up rate? And I'm talking about this after the first few months where you're literally 2-3 people and word of mouth. After you go past that, how do the signups look like? Have a weekly measurement on, or bi-weekly, whatever you want, measurement on the sign-up rate. Take a look at what is the retention of those users. Are they coming back to you? Reach out to them, especially at the initial stages. I mean, for the first 30 to 40 customers, even enterprise class customers, I'm not even talking about consumers, end users. I'm talking about even, because that's the place I've been in, enterprise side. We used to reach out to them regularly and figure out how to improve and keep them retained. Retention is extremely important. Then they will spread the product through their word of mouth, and then the network value increases significantly. And once you get past that, then you have all of these data that I mean, the numbers that I told you, metrics that I mentioned to you earlier, which is sign up rate, onboarding rate, purchase conversions, things like that. So keep just 3 to 5. Do not go over that. Otherwise, you could be consumed by the overwhelming amount of data. I hope that answered it. I don't know if there's some Q&A. Do we answer them now along or at the end?
No, I think we have a few more questions and then I'll dive into Q&A maybe in about like 5 more minutes. Great. So in terms of the strategic questions that founders should be asking themselves when developing a go-to-market strategy as it relates to competition and team, what are some of those questions? And I know we also have a question in the chat about teams, so I think it'll be a good moment to get to that. And so I'll pass that to Rob first.
Yeah, and I love this question. You know, as it relates to competition, I kind of kicked this off, and why I mentioned this early on was looking in the mirror, right? There's tons of competition all around the world in all these different markets. And so be realistic, even if it's not a direct competitor, how that competition is, and look in the mirror. And when you're looking in the mirror as a company and you're looking at go-to-market, who do I need around me to be successful in that market? What are the roles? I see this happen a lot with startups that go to a new market. They go swing for the fence and hire a super high level, C-level person with a black book that can make all these intros, has 25 years experience, and it tends to not work out. Why? Because they create false positives, right? They're making intros, but they're not necessarily buyers. When you go to a new market, don't hire somebody that is super, super experienced that's not going to roll up their sleeves and get in the weeds. Hire somebody that's a doer, a mover, and a shaker that you can put on task with you, because as Murali and Christina pointed out, there's so many things that need to get done in a new market. You need somebody who can swim in shades of gray, wear multiple hats, and not afraid to get the work done. So when you look at building and going into these markets with your team, who do I need around me? And what are the resources do I need in that market? What can we do from here? And testing some of those things out. So I'll stop there because I can go deep into this. And Christina's laughing because her and I have talked on this subject many a times, and pass the ball for a second. I can get deeper in the Q&A.
Great. Christina, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, some of the questions I kind of jotted down here that I think they're probably a little high level, but, who do I need in place to run this strategy? Rob kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think some founders, unfortunately, make the mistake of hiring someone who wants to lead a team from the get-go versus someone who is going to grow to lead, right? And so I think the big thing is hiring a doer, right? So do you have doers in place, bright minds that like to collaborate and can, kind of hone in on the strategic aspects, but push to production quickly and push to good, right? Or push good, not perfect. What do I need in place? And I mean like infrastructurally. Is there tech that I need, right? We haven't even gotten into that. Is there tech that I need to be able to understand what's happening, the baselines, track things? It could be as simple as tracking things in a spreadsheet. I've been there. I still kind of rely on that in some ways. So what do you need to have in place infrastructurally? And then do you want to follow the beaten path or take the road less traveled? And what I mean by that is, and I'll talk about this when we talk about some of the mistakes we've made, is just, do you want to take the traditional route of I need Salesforce because that's what everybody uses, right? Or I need to use marketing automation because that's what everyone has in play versus, let's just double down on video for this quarter and see what happens. Don't get too caught up in the social norms that come along with the journey in entrepreneurship. You have to do X, Y, Z. You've got to get married before you have kids. Kind of the same analogy here. That's all I have to add to that one.
That is a great analogy. And so I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll get to before, and then I'll open it up to Q&A as we have some questions in the chat. And if you have questions for the panelists, now is the time to put them in the Q&A. What are some of the mistakes that you've made in the past? How have you adapted and how have you learned from it so that our attendees can learn from your mistakes and hopefully not make the same ones? And so I'll pass it off to Murali first, and then I would love, Rob and Christina to weigh in.
Yeah, I think this particular point also kind of ties into one of the questions that I see from Igor. It's about the audience. I'm talking about specifically mistakes in the go-to-market side of the house, right? And specifically within that, I thought maybe I can use it to talk about Igor's question is about what do you think is a good and useful presentation? How will it change over time? And what are the best pitching aspects? If it's okay, I have a really fun example that my 10-year-old actually was told in his class. If it's okay, I can share my screen with this picture. Is that okay? Allowed?
Can we give Murali access to screen share?
Yeah, so, fundamentals don't change. What I learned from that is that fundamentals don't really change whether you're a 10-year-old in school or you're a 45-year-old like me. And so essentially, fundamentally, the key thing is knowing your audience and making the message very clear. Start with, I don't know if I have access to it right now, but if
yeah,
it's not,
you should have at the bottom of your screen. Can you see screen share, the button?
Yeah, I can see it. So let me, yeah. So while that's happening, what I wanted to, I think it's stuck behind privacy metrics, but fundamentally, the summary is this, right? You need to focus on what your audience really cares about. That's the most important thing. Second thing, you need, so what I think Jerry Wiseman calls the WIFI, which is what's in it for you, WIFI. So think about the audience. The presentation has to be tailored towards that. So I would break actually your audience into multiple types of audience. Like a questioner asked, investor audience is different from customer audience, is different from your market media press audience. So show how your audience will benefit by getting your message out. That's the key. It's not about how much volume of messages presentation you want to give or how many words you want to use. Speak confidently and talk about, give comparisons that people can understand. Hey, I am the Airbnb of X or Uber of Y. That was used a lot. It may or may not apply in today's world, but comparisons definitely help. And use references that audiences can understand. Maybe if in Ukraine, there are certain references that people can understand better. Or for example, if you're in other part, going to international audiences, look for references in that world. So a common thing that I use is sports, music, analogies, and then ultimately cite authoritative sources so that people can get a sense of why your product is important right now. So I hope I answered the question. So that was a big mistake that I made when I started out with my first startup. And certainly the big lesson for me is making sure that you can get your pitch down, whether it is a 30-second elevator pitch, whether it is a 1 minute or a 5-minute pitch. Because after that, the audience's attention span also goes. So you have to follow on these few points.
I love that. It goes on to like something that you said earlier on, like, it's not about you, right? And or maybe it was Rob that said that, but it's like, it's about your audience and like what they are going to need to hear. So I love that. Christina, I would love to hear some of your mistakes.
Well, you know, I don't really like to think of them as mistakes. I like to think of them as learning experiences. You know, make a mistake once, learn from it. Great. If you keep making it, now that probably is a mistake at that point. But, you know, I have a few that I've made, and I think that's part of the learning curve too. That's how you actually get better at what you're doing. And so I have one that's still kind of fresh, but I've made the wrong decision on a core piece of technology for our go-to-market strategy here at Interseller. And, you know, I think what happened is I was blinded by what I felt we needed to do because everyone else had it in place. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in the previous question, is like, do you want to follow a traditional path, or do you want to kind of be disruptive or do things outside the norm, right? Instead of really thinking about our strategy, our resources, doing a deeper dive in the discovery and evaluation process of that core piece of tech, what came from it? Well, we took the loss. I paid it for a quarter with this product, you know, and while that still stinks, it's money down the pipe. We decided to move in a different nuanced direction. It actually surfaced some key problems that we had with existing process and data that we could then fix, so that if we went into that situation again, we'd be a little bit more prepared on what questions we needed to ask. And I was able to put together a process doc on like how we should handle big tech evaluations at the company in the future, you know, what questions to ask, who should be involved, when should we start? And, you know, I think the other mistake, this might go into someone's question, is spending too much money too soon on marketing. There's so many organic marketing tactics you can deploy before just making a jump to paid testing. So happy to jam on that outside of this if anyone wants to talk through.
Awesome. So I'm going to dive now into Q&A as that because we have a bunch of questions now, and I want to make sure we get to as many of them as possible. So we have one it says, I'm running a mobile app that helps people to speak a foreign language fluently, easily, confidently. The question is, how to define which channel is most relevant for me? I know that I have to test, but marketing is money.
I love this question. And Christina, I wanted to beat you to the punch on one thing before you dig into this a little bit, is when you're evaluating all these things and you're coming into a new market, you need to remember that there's some education that needs to be done. And when you look at what that education is, you need to be seen as a credible source, right? So if you're developing a new technology, developing a new piece of product or service, and people don't know about it a little bit or don't know about you, you need to go start creating that validation, creating that credibility. And so the way that you go about doing this organically is extremely important. And for many times, your personal brand is going to be bigger than sometimes the company brand. And so how do you leverage those things using different tools? And so when you start looking at testing these different things, and I'll let Christina get into the nitty gritty of it, is don't forget to educate. You need to create some of these anchors, blog posts, different things that I know are tedious and time consuming. Are you SEO optimized? Are you doing these different things? There's a lot of things that you can do early and often to create credibility so that when you go and test against it, it works. One of the biggest mistakes we made in a company I worked for out of Italy when we were going into a new market, we were doing sub 5K monthly MRR and spending 70% of that back on marketing. And we weren't getting the good data we needed. What we did is we re-looked at our customer segmentation, we redefined our customer journey, and we relaunched the right segment. And we took away a lot of the marketing budget and we put some free content out there and really anchored it. We went and retested it. We were able to grow our MRR 2K month over month for 6 straight months while decreasing marketing spend from 70% to 20% because we created education out there. So then once you build off that, and I'll let Christina talk a little bit about building off that education, but that is to that question and to a very real hard lesson we learned and spent a lot of money throwing money out there into channels that didn't work.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that real fast, because I know we have questions and we're coming up on time. Content marketing, which is kind of what Rob went into, building that educational component, building the brand, the voice, before you even get into any kind of paid avenues of testing. I think the biggest piece is the social proof too. What kind of social proof are you building? Really understand through your customer's voice, let them kind of spread that word for you. Honestly, I could probably go more into that, but we have 5 minutes and more questions. So
great.
I'll stop.
So I'll dive into another question from Fasolka. If you do some innovative product and in process of testing respond from the market, you understand that people are not going to buy it now. Would you continue your work upon the product because you strongly believe that in future it will work in the market and will grow to the level of your innovation, or do you change your product? Do you pivot?
I could take that.
Great.
I think it's important. I mean, of course, there was a certain amount of personal element there, which is that you believe a lot in your product and that its time will come. I think if you marry that with some amount of smaller blocks, break that end vision to a mission that you're going after for that to service that vision, and then break your journey into multiple smaller objectives that ultimately will take you in that direction. Do not go to build a perfect vision product is my personal recommendation. Looks, at the end of the day, even for an emotional reason, startups must have growth. You have the feel-good factor. You have to figure out how you can break into the smallest chunk objective that you feel like you've hit that milestone. So those goals are important as you go there. Pick one metric, pick one element of the product the bigger product that is clicking with your audience. Go for that, double down on it, and then measure retention of that, then add things to it. That's what I would recommend. And that's how you will innovate and change it over time, because innovation ultimately is an idea plus execution. So there has to be execution.
I love it.
Just to piggyback on that, the other side of that is the education piece. So if it is innovative and the people aren't buying it today, the reason they're not buying it today is because they don't know why. And so even if you have an innovative product, if no one understands the why, they'll never buy. So you need to start the education piece today for the why tomorrow, so that when they're ready to buy, they'll buy and they know why they're buying.
Awesome. I think our last question also touches a little bit on the education aspect. How to install a new habit for people. They say, we are developing a service that will contain data with the help of QR codes about passed away people. This is a sensitive topic and people are used to just putting up monuments. How to teach them to use our service to store more information about their passed away relatives.
Yeah, it's this education, it's delicate, right? You need to lean into it, understanding that, you know, people buy with their limbic brain, which means on emotion. They don't buy off data, they buy off emotion. And so when you have very emotional topics like this and you're creating new habits, understand that you have to do it with empathy, right? You have to do it in a way that, hey, we understand this is tough and we understand this is the past, but here's a way to create a better solution. And this goes into education of what is your why? Why are you doing it? What's the value for the customer? What is that lasting effect? Not for the person who passed away, but for those that care about that person. What do they get out of it? What is that lasting memory or effect? And so you do that with empathy and lean into it. Understand that you're going to have really hard conversations and draw really real, raw emotions and some objections. And not everyone's going to love this. And you have to take that with a grain of salt, take it with thick skin, but also with empathy in that whole process. But lean into those conversations and have them.
Great. Okay.
Can I add just one point?
Yeah, please
okay?
do. Yeah.
You know, it might touch upon multiple of the questions out there. There is a saying that I read. There's this company called Mixpanel. I don't know if many of you use it or not for measuring metrics, but the saying goes something like this. Most of the people will make decisions by either guessing or using their gut. They will either be lucky or wrong. So my strong recommendation is, please make sure that, yes, there is some gut and feeling that the product is innovative and all of that, but make it into smaller chunks and measure that small chunk. And then the other thing I want to also, just my experience is, don't do too much paid growth investment or dollars without actually having revenues to back that up with. There are a lot of free tools available. I was talking to a founder recently. He built a whole, I mean, this is for the engineering side of the house. He has built a backend system which uses every relevant software capability that that's out there in the market to the point that it is free. So then jumps to another one. If it's a 1 month, this many users, go to that extreme and then jump back next month. Build a system that actually uses these free tools out there. You can get until you get to the critical mass. That's my personal recommendation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Murali. Great. Well, I want to thank you. We're at time. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you, Rob, Christina, Murali, for giving us this wonderful insight and information. They're putting their LinkedIns in the chat right now, so if you'd like to connect with any of the panelists, please do. If you're interested in learning more about the iHUB powered by NUMA program, we'd love to talk to you. This is what we do. We love helping entrepreneurs learn the best ways to do things so that they don't make the same mistakes that we have and can learn from the experts. So we're available. Our team is available for one-to-one conversations. So thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.